Hello, welcome to my vlog, the fifth one, I think, of 2016. I mean, they've been kind of weekly, and I don't know if I'm going to carry it on weekly or not. I might, I don't know. Some weekends it's going to be difficult, like if I'm away or something like that, but I think mostly I'll be able to manage it. So today, actually not much has been happening this week, it seems to me. Just go to work, come home, go to work, come home, that sort of thing. But I have received a couple of leaflets. The Stay and a Leave campaign, basically for the Brexit or EU referendum, which is happening on Thursday. And if you've seen my other videos, you'll see that I've decided, after much hemming and hawing, I'm going to vote Brexit, because I think I've been able to establish the fact of the matter that the EU is not democratic enough. There are democratic-ish institutions, but it's all kind of back to front, and the Commission is in charge of effectively what gets debated in Parliament and what gets debated in the EU Council by our own elected representatives in both cases. And really that's kind of back to front. So and the debates themselves, especially in the EU Council, are not rationally designed. It seems to be that they have a trilogue beforehand where everything's decided between the three houses, as it were: the Parliament, the Council, which is a kind of a Senate, and the Commission, which is a bureaucracy, the civil service. They decide in advance really what's going to be talked about and what the issues are within the given subject areas, and they only debate on the basis of what's been told to them from that, which is, it's a kind of a secret way of controlling things. If you control the information flow, you control the outcome, really. And another issue which has perhaps arisen more this week is the EU's economic inefficiency, in part I think because of the irrationality of these kinds of debates. It's so bad. The euro crisis continues. The EU has been run badly for many years, decades, and I think that it's time to stop it. We need to be together with Europe, but not via this political union. I think. I mean, what's wrong with the way it's been run economically is, first of all, the euro, the currency. They cleverly and rightly devised rules saying that countries should not join the euro until they were economically ready. They should be economically aligned with the countries that were already in it, if you like. So a couple of big countries like Germany and France would go in it. And then the other countries, which had higher interest rates and weaker currencies, would try and align their countries so they'd have similar unemployment levels, or at least the same or better, reasonably low interest rates, because they were running their economy sensibly and could be relied upon. And then, if those were right, then they would join. But in fact, what happened was the politicians and the bureaucrats, having made these rules, then ignored them and got everybody to join the euro except us and I think one other country. And of course it doesn't work. Interest rates are low for Germany and France, and indeed Britain, but we're not in the euro. Interest rates are low for those countries because they are economic powerhouses in comparison, especially Germany. Whereas Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, and the Eastern European countries are economically pretty poor, really, for the most part. They're good areas, but they're nowhere near Germany. And so the result is that those countries, being in the euro, have their interest rates much lower than they should be, which means that people can take on debts more easily. Now, in a sense, that could be good because they can start a business, they can take a loan out more easily, but in practice, with weak economies, it's not proven to be sustainable, and those countries are in unsustainable debt. And this is because they were allowed to join despite everybody knowing, A, that they weren't ready, and B, that they were in breach of the rules. So that's the first thing that's gone wrong. And this enlargement, which is going on and on, again, when countries are not yet ready. I mean, for goodness sake, they're talking about bringing Turkey in with like, what is it, 80 million people. 80% of them are so Muslims. 20% of them are supporting ISIS, or ISIL, or whatever it's called, right? With a high murder rate, because everybody settles their issues with the knife over there. They don't sit down and discuss it over a cup of tea like we might. No. So, and with an IQ of about 90, because they have so many cousin marriages. Again, about a quarter, I think, of their population. And that brings down... Cousin marriages are legal, of course, even here, but it's not really done much. And there are good biological reasons. It actually lowers, on average, lowers IQ by 10 to 20%. Because you don't get a good mix of genes, basically. The advantage of breeding with somebody different from yourself is that you mix up your genes a lot, and you get your body in production selects the best set, the least faulty set, to actually build you from. But if you're cousins, then you have the same faults on both sides, and it's not so good, and it's noticeable. The difference is significant. And this country also, Turkey, has a GDP of, I think, something like a quarter of any other EU country. I mean, it's even worse than Greece and places like that. So they're not going to benefit from it. The politicians always seem to be in favour. I think they think there's like a gravy train for them when they retire. They can come to the EU, perhaps. And of course they get lobbied by corporatists, because what's going to happen is all the corporates are going to move in, buy up the high streets, so that they'll become like a clone of high streets everywhere else, as we see in Britain, where all the high streets basically look the same. They have the same shops in them, with the same goods in them all, supposedly in competition with each other. So all the little individual enterprises will be squashed out. Also, EU regulations, which are devised as a result of corporate lobbying, means that all these little shops and little companies and little factories will not be able to afford the kind of testing that the corporates demand, because they know that they can do it and their products already conform. So these little businesses will just have to close. So that's not going to benefit the Turkish people very well, certainly not in the early stages. Plus, all the most entrepreneurial spirits and perhaps a lot of the unemployable are going to leave Turkey and go elsewhere. So, in particular, a lot of their best people, they will have a brain drain. And the same is happening in Eastern Europe, Romania, and so on. Yes, we get their criminals, but we also get some of the most, who are entrepreneurial spirits, I suppose. But we get a lot of their best people leaving as well, because they can get 10 times the money over here. Well, of course they're going to come. So what happens when these poor countries join the EU is they get ripped off, basically. But do the politicians care? No. It seems not. I might have a think about what's in it for the politicians, because it's strange they keep doing it. But anyway, the leaflets. This is the Vote Leave leaflet, okay, and it's saying the EU costs us 350 million a week. We could spend that on the NHS instead. Now everybody knows by now that this 350 million a week is a theoretical maximum, and in fact it's about 110 million a week. And I don't know why they keep quoting this figure. It discredits them, to be honest. But anyway, it's too close now for them to start changing their minds and saying, oh well, maybe we should be more sensible. But it has some arguments in it. Over 250,000 people migrate to the UK from the EU every year. That's equivalent to a city the size of Newcastle. Many immigrants contribute to our society. They also have an impact on public services. Experts disagree on the overall effect. Well, they're giving us a fair argument there. I think I've seen some calculations that indicate that the net cost of the immigrants is about 15 billion pounds a year negative. Because in the long run they're to our benefit, because they've set up businesses, they need services and so on, they need goods. But in the short run we have to build infrastructure, we have to support them with schools and hospitals and things of this sort. And the net cost so far is about 15 billion. On top of that we're paying about 8 billion into the EU anyway, net. Not this 350 million nonsense a week. As I say, it's about 110 million. The EU is expanding, I've talked about that. They want to include Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia and Turkey. And we have contradictory talk from the Remain campaign, sometimes saying, oh, Turkey's not going to join till the year 3000, and then David Cameron, who said that, is also saying, we're going to fast-track Turkey, I'm your biggest supporter in the EU Council. Well, make your mind up. 89 million, the population of Turkey. Oh no, it's 89 million including all those little countries as well. I mean, Albania, this is a country where they still use sort of horse and cart half the time. At least it was a few years ago. I presume it's not changed that much. The European Union has changed enormously since the UK joined the Common Market in 1973. It has to be said that when the referendum, I was a little too young, I was a couple of years too young to vote, but I would have voted in favour of the EU because I wanted a big federal state like the United States. But it was sold to the public as a common market, a trading union, and only after John Major took us into the Maastricht Treaty for a European Union did it become a European Union, a political union. And really that's not what we signed up for, especially in Britain. I mean, I knew it was going to be heading towards a federal Europe, it was kind of obvious, but nobody had the honesty to say so at the time, none of the politicians, although of course they knew. And I think it's right to have a referendum now. Do we want this political union? Do we want to be governed by politicians in irrational meetings who go ahead with what they want regardless of what we want? Now's our last chance to choose. Now if we vote Brexit, the odds are we're going to have another referendum in a couple of years once the negotiations are done. I think it's likely that they will try to patch together some deal to bribe us. And because the vote is close, it's going to be close. There's a legitimate argument for saying we should have another referendum when we've had a bit more time to decide and when some opt-outs maybe have been put on a more cast iron basis. So we'll see. The EU law overrules UK law. Well, it does. Regulations, when they make them, are implemented automatically, and there's directives which are sent to our Parliament for us to implement in a way that suits us. How many of our rules or laws are determined by the EU is hard to estimate. Probably between 15 and 55%. But many of them, as regulations, are implemented just like that. We have no real say over them. And the European Court also overrules our sovereignty. And in the EU Council, although we're mostly on the side of voting in favour of whatever they're talking about and therefore get it, on the 40 occasions when we voted against in the last few years, we've lost every time. So that's not really having a say. It's you become a rubber stamp, basically. And I know a lot of young people think the EU surely is a good thing, but they're not thinking, I think, about the democratic aspects of it. It's important to have control over your government, because in the long run they will do whatever they want otherwise. It's bad enough as it is, without them knowing that the democracy is a sham. It needs to be more of a proper democracy, I think. It's too dangerous otherwise. The EU costs us at least 350 million a week. We could spend that on the NHS, blah 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 blah. Oh, rubbish. Okay. You don't have to be a member of the EU to trade with it. It's true. While we're in the EU, the UK isn't allowed to negotiate our own trade deals. That's very bad. I think we really should negotiate our trade deals. And we'd be better off, and it would be quicker. Having to get 28 countries to agree to every deal is just close to impossible. This was the problem with the League of Nations before the United Nations as well. You couldn't get agreement on anything, and even with the United Nations you can hardly get an agreement on anything. There are risks in voting either way. It's correct. We don't know what the risks are. Either way, it's quite likely the EU is going through major crises at the moment. Well, it is, and it's quite likely that these are going to cause big problems, whether we're in or whether we're out. We're going to be affected by them, but we'll be affected by them more if we're in. If we're out, at least we have some insulation, and we will probably have some more trade with other nations in the world, a little bit more Europe-proof ourselves, perhaps. Does the EU keep us safe? Brexit will bring two potentially important security gains: the ability to dump the European Convention on Human Rights, and more importantly, greater control over immigration from the European Union. Now, I favour the European Convention on Human Rights. I think human rights are important. But if we have our own Bill of Rights, it may be okay. Obviously, we'll have greater control over immigration from the European Union if we're out. Not total control, but more control. Would jobs be at risk? EU regulations make it harder for British firms to hire staff. And big employers, blah blah blah, say they'll stay in the UK whatever the result. Of course they will. Most of them will. Does the EU mean lower prices? The EU places tariffs on goods from outside the EU. And the EU forces us to charge VAT on goods, pushing up bills for working families. Indeed, it's not clear whether prices will go up or down if we leave. There are arguments either way. Some prices will go up, some will go down. Nigel Lawson, will we be better or worse off? He's the former Chancellor of the Exchequer. In economic terms, membership of the EU does more harm than good. Outside the EU, we would be free to prosper, we would be free, and we would stand tall. Well, I don't know what that means, there's no facts there. What's best for business? Director General, British Chambers of Commerce, the EU interferes with UK firms and stacks the rules in favour of a select number of big businesses. I've talked about that already, how the corporates have their rules and little companies can't comply with them. If we vote leave, jobs will be safer, we can have faster growth and greater prosperity in the future. I think that's right. the big corporates, they have too much influence, and they are not, although they are big employers, most business is done by smaller companies, and these corporates are using big government as a way to squash the competition, and it has to be stopped, really, or we will all be working for huge faceless autocratic corporations with no moral basis other than making money. Does the EU protect workers' rights? The rights we have won for British workers came from our Parliament, not the EU. The EU is running the interests of big corporations who spend billions lobbying to make it work for them. Yes, despite what Labour says, I don't think the EU does protect workers' rights. There are some social charter and things like that, but we've had social charters of our own, and we can do the same. And I don't think bringing in millions, literally millions, of low-wage people from Europe and undermining the jobs of our own people is a way to improve their rights. Really. So that's the Leave campaign. Then we have the Stay campaign. Your future is at stake. How you can keep Britain stronger in Europe. 1. Vote. Display the poster. Stronger in, yeah. Talk to your friends and family. And on the back it says, don't let Farage speak for you. Choose a stronger future. And that's the entire leaflet. There's actually no argument. There's one ad hominem insult, one attack on a person. There's a slogan, your future is at stake, vote Remain, stronger in, how you can keep Britain stronger in Europe. They don't say how you can keep Britain stronger in Europe. They don't say why Britain is supposed to be stronger in Europe. Normally, when people come up with an attack on a person, ad hominem as it's known, that's because they don't have any arguments. I mean, basically that's the meaning of of it. If you're arguing with somebody and they start insulting you or they get angry, that means they're not handling it very well. And if they start insulting you, it means, if they're getting angry, they're not handling it very well, but if they start insulting you, that means really they must have run out of proper arguments. Of course, they may be upset because you're not understanding their arguments, but here they're not even trying to make an argument. There is nothing. It's it's like they want us to vote out but they're not saying so. And it could be so. It's like Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party. He probably does really want us to go out, but in order to keep the Labour Party united, he has to kind of half-heartedly support staying in. Because the majority of Labour MPs think we should stay in. They're all for socialism and corporatism, and which they shouldn't be, given what they supposedly believe, but there you go. And bureaucracy and central power and all that. That's very, very puzzling. That leaflet is just empty. There's nothing there. Do they have no argument? Well, how could Britain be stronger in Europe? We can negotiate together with 500 million others, except everybody who's negotiating with us knows that we will hardly ever get all 28 countries to agree on something. And these treaties need unanimous votes, I think, to go through for like trade deals and so on. The EU has recently given up on making a trade deal with India. Switzerland managed it. Did Canada manage it? I don't know. Somebody did. Switzerland did, I think. because there's only one parliament that has to agree to it there. It's bizarre, and actually it does make me think that the Remain campaign actually secretly want us to vote out. They must have chosen this strategy with some bit of thought. They have marketing people there. Have they been told somewhere, look, make it look like you're arguing for us to stay in, but in reality, Britain is better out? Is that what it means? Surely not. But maybe it is. Maybe it is. I know it's clear from, say, the Murdoch press, which I've mentioned before, Rupert Murdoch's papers, they want us out because they never lose an opportunity to slag off Europe, even with lies. So some corporates want us out because the EU is going to interfere with their way of doing business and reduces their influence, perhaps, to some extent, for some of them. It's a bit of a shame to be on the same side as Rupert Murdoch. But there you go. Strange. Talking about Switzerland, they voted on the universal basic income the other week, and they voted against it. The idea of a universal basic income is that everybody will get paid by the government. Instead of having benefits, everybody just gets a basic income, and you can get a job and get more if you want. And they voted against it by 77% of them voted against it, basically, so no chance. I think the actual proposition was pretty vague, and there was also a lot of concern. It was so vague, it just said we should have a universal basic income. It didn't say how it would be paid for, it didn't say how much it would be, it didn't say how universal it would be. It was not good enough, really. But there was also some concern in that Switzerland has open borders with Europe. And if they're going to be paying everybody, say, a couple of £1,000 worth a month of income for free, millions of people would suddenly move to Switzerland, right, because they've got open borders. What could they do? Oh, there's somebody at the door. I'm going to pause this and come back in a minute. Okay, it wasn't for me, so that's alright. So yes, so that's Switzerland. They voted against the universal basic income. But its time will come, probably. Finland is starting an experiment, I think, soon, with about 8,000 people in one region or town or something. And I think Utrecht, the city of Utrecht, is going to start an experiment in January, just to see how it goes. So we will all see how it goes. I mentioned corporate responsibility. I think a lot of us know that these big corporations, they do things which are unethical for the sake of money. Monsanto is famous for genetically modifying stuff without doing proper testing, or there's tobacco companies selling cigarettes and stuff. I don't object to people buying shares in those companies or anything, making money out of them, because if people are going to, waste their money on poisons, they might as well waste their money in my direction. At least I can do some good with it. But not that I'm wealthy enough to be a big shareholder in these companies, but I understand that I don't think there's a problem with investing in them. But I do think the companies themselves, the people who work in them, are not taking personal responsibility. There's, I think, only this week, some big coal corporation, was it Pearson or something like that in the United States, is folding, but it's been found that they've been investing large sums of money in lots of different anti-climate change or climate change denier organisations, which have been deliberately distorting the evidence and so on. And it's like the people who work in these companies, they are not, I think, taking personal responsibility for their actions. If your boss tells you to do something and it's unethical, really, you should do... There are three choices. You do it and just say, oh well, I'm only following orders. I've got to make my wages, I've got to look after my family, right? But I think there are two other options for you. One, you can refuse, say it's unethical, argue within the company, and 99 times out of 100 get the sack. Okay. Or you could do what you have to do, but look for another job. I think that middle way is probably best. Of course, you could also, perhaps there's a fourth way, do what you're asked, but do it badly. I mean, if you're in some dictatorship state, or like Soviet Union, people did do things badly because the whole system is set up to demotivate and people and ruin their morale. But you could also do it deliberately, and thereby maintain your morale, because you'll get pleasure out of crushing the system back, right? Until they find out and sack you or something. In the West, you won't get executed, but you know, over there in a more dictatorial regime, you maybe just play stupid and do things badly that way. But you can't let on you're intelligent, because the intelligentsia constantly get killed by unscrupulous politicians and people. Intelligent people can act stupid, but stupid people can't act intelligent, right? So that's life. But I think a lot of us find in companies that the companies do things which are corporate in style, like they'll put a message on the answering machine saying, "Thank you for calling. Your call is important to us. Please hold. Your call for your protection. This call is being monitored for training and for your protection," or something to that effect, right? Whereas we all know that the call is being recorded for their protection, right? Not for your protection. So why do we put up with these lies all the time? We're supposed to do business with a company that lies to us. If the call was important, they would answer it. They would have enough people on the line. They have help desks which are, for the most part, not very good. Let's put it that way. Where the staff don't really have knowledge or discretion to do what's needed to fix things. Sometimes they do, but often they don't. Where indeed the help desk is outsourced to some distant country where they can pay them like 4p an hour or something and make them work for 18 hours a day or something stupid like that, and this is unethical too. It makes money, but and I do think making money is important. You should do a lot to make money, but if you have the money, you can do good with it. But I think there is a point beyond which you shouldn't go. I do feel that the other extreme, the sort of the socialist extreme of a lot of government interference and over-taxation and over-regulation and stopping people making so much money, is also bad. There's a happy medium in between, which is about right. And so you make quite a bit more money, but you don't go so far that ethics are compromised. And I think in our corporate world, it behoves us to be a bit of a maverick and at least say when we see these things. But you've got to be careful because you don't want to get the sack. But if you do, well, find a better company, right? If more of us did this, the companies would have to adapt a bit. I know there are a lot of unethical people. The average human is not very moral, actually. But we can do our bit and push a bit up to our comfort zone and maybe a little beyond it to try and improve things. No, I don't know. I was thinking about gravitational waves because I know it's a few weeks since they were first measured, but I think a lot of people are not aware of what the benefit of gravitational waves is. I thought I'd mention it. The point is that when we look out into the universe, we can see back almost to the beginning. We can see back to about 300,000 years after the Big Bang, assuming a Big Bang really happened, and that's what it looks like. You can go and read the evidence for yourself. There's plenty of it. But we can't look back to beyond that point. So we see about, 13.5 billion years, something like that. And beyond that we can't see, we just see a haze, because at earlier times the universe was opaque to light. It was too hot. The atoms are all ionized, and so they blocked photons. So all we see is a haze, and we can't see further back to what happened. Because when you look a long way away, you're seeing back in time, because it takes a long time for the light to get to you. We're seeing the sun as it was 8 minutes ago, right? Because it takes 8 minutes for the light to get to us. The Andromeda Galaxy we're seeing a few 100 million years ago, how it was. And when we look way, way off into the distance, we're seeing 13 or so billion years ago, right? The light took that long to get to us. And any further than that, it's just a haze, because the light was not able to get out, as it were. It was bouncing around and just an opaque mess. So that's all we see is the microwave background radiation, and that's it. No proper shapes or objects in it. But it's transparent to gravity. The universe is always transparent to gravity. So if we can measure gravitational waves from the early times, from the distant universe, we'll be able to see right back to the very edge of the observable universe, which is, i.e., although it's all around us as we see it, in fact it would have been a teeny little point. Mathematically they're the same, and optically they're the same. It's kind of weird. So that's the point of gravitational waves. We'll be able to see back through that haze and test our theories. Was there a Big Bang? Was there cosmic inflation? And if it's proved to be true, then that is a strong argument that there must be parallel universes as well. Because the theory of inflation, that the universe started as a little teeny point and then expanded rapidly, and then we're still suffering from the momentum of that, if you like, and it's still expanding in a way, but not so rapidly. If that's verified, then the theory of inflation implies parallel universes as well. So if that is proven true by the observations we make, if its predictions for what we will see when we look further back are correct, then we have to take seriously its other predictions. It's like Einstein's theory of gravity predicts black holes, and it predicts what happens inside black holes. We can't see inside black holes because we can never get the information out. We could send a probe in, but it won't send any information out because nothing can get out. But because the predictions that it makes that we can observe are so accurate, we have to take seriously those things we can't observe too. So that's gravitational waves. I just thought I'd mention it. because I've been thinking about it a bit, and parallel universes. I wanted to work out, there's more to say about parallel universes, and I might do that in another video, maybe next week or the week after, something like that. But for now, I think that's it. So, goodbye, and I'll see you maybe next week. Bye for now.